So why is Digital Product Passport an enabler of eco-design and sustainability is going to be the main goal to tell you about in this presentation. First of all, I would like to start with just overall context. We see that sustainability, especially in the EU, is legislatively driven. We have a lot of Green Deal regulations and directives that are coming into play right now. So over 10 EU laws that we would count. Of course, there are others that are more product specific, but generally speaking, this is quite the effort. This also means that the efforts for CSRD and ESRS, for example, is quite a lot. All the data points that have to be collected, we just heard about from the Mitsubishi, that this is something that is not only done in 1 year, but it has to be done every year. And especially the first time of data collection is quite the effort. So then on the other side, we also have product-specific regulation like the battery regulation, where you have a lot of data points, which I will be talking about later on in more detail. And on the other side, there are also clients of ours who are asking us, so how much do I have to pay if I do non-compliance? And what would be the end result of that? This also could mean that there are quite high penalties, up to 4% of your annual global turnover. This is only here, for example, for CSRD compliance, but also for a lot of other legislative initiatives. So the need for sustainability is high, and I would always argue that right now it is not mostly business case driven, but it is legislatively driven. So here we have a selection of relevant sustainability legislation of the EU. My presentation today is going to be focused on the EU legislation. We see, for example, the CSRD was already mentioned today. EU taxonomy comes into play with the CSRD on what is green and what is not. So in the reporting, I think these are legislative initiatives which we are very familiar with. On the other side, in the data management part, we see with the ESPR, so that is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, that this is something that is newly coming. CBAM or Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, also something that you might be familiar with. The EUDR was already mentioned, has to be applied on until end of this year, so there is not a lot of time right now, and most companies are delving into this right now with quite the concentration, quite the focus. If we look at what is already adopted and what still has to be adopted and implemented, we see that most of the Green Deal legislation will be in force in the next months and years. So by 2026, the major part of the Green Deal legislative initiatives will be enforced, will also have to be applied upon. We see that there are some that are still in transposition, like the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, but the EU document is already finalized and we can already work with it. When we go through all of those legislative initiatives, we'll see that there are some topics which we always see. So for example, these are just 3 hot topics. I guess that is also for today's and tomorrow's session, which is carbon assessments, CO2 calculations on the one side, and circular economy, recyclability, recycled content, all of these KPIs. And we do have due diligence, which will have a major uprise through the due diligence directive, which will transform also due diligence that we are doing here in Germany on a higher level, and which will be supplemented by the EUDR, so the deforestation regulation. And as I'm already trying to tell you, all of these legislative initiatives, they are interconnected and they have a lot of overlap. And this is something that I want to show you now in a little bit more detail. So on the one side, on the corporate level, we see it with the reporting directive, with the due diligence directive. These come together. Of course, the taxonomy is informing on what you can and have to be reporting in your CSRD report. And then two regulations which I didn't talk about earlier, which might be new to you, is the ECGT, so Empowering Consumers for a Green Transition Directive. This is about what kind of communication you can do business to consumer in terms of environmental labeling and environmental claims. And on the other side, the Green Claims Directive is something that is still in the legislative process. The trilogue is going to start, I think, next week or in 2 weeks. So we'll have a provisional agreement maybe by the end of this year already, and this will have a major impact on what you can actually communicate in terms of environmental claims. So Mitsubishi, for example, has a carbon neutrality claim by 2050. This is going to be regulated also by the Green Claims Directive. So it's very important to look ahead, even though it's just a draft document right now. On the product level, we'll have similar situation. We have different kind of legislative initiatives throughout the product life cycle. And EUDR already talked about the right to repair is, of course, very important in the use phase, also coming right now. So most of those legislations are still in the process. And one point I want to try to make today is that it's very important to not wait until legislation is adopted, but to look ahead and see how everything comes into play together. You can see that there's one initiative, the ESPR, which I tried to show from the left to the right side, quite overreaching, since the ESPR is going to be introducing a so-called digital product passport, which means it envisions a digital twin of your product that will apply a lot of eco-design requirements from the design and development of the product with as planned data to the acquisition until the end of life and in the second life. So we can see that if we look into the legislation, there are a lot of those interactions. And I want to mention just 2 examples. So for you to understand why all of this could be streamlined, all of those legislative requirements with the digital product passport. One of those examples was already talked about is the CSRD. And the CSRD doesn't have a specific interaction to the ESPR, but an indirect one, which is that by 2028, there will be new standards released for the CSRD for the reasonable assurance. Right now, some companies are already looking into reasonable assurance, especially in the focus on carbon footprints, but this will be newly standardized by the EU Commission by October 2028. This will mean that the primary data share for the CSRD data has to be increased tremendously, and this can be done by the introduction of digital product passports in the supply chain to gather more primary data. On the other side, I already mentioned the Green Claims Directive. Right now, there are 3 different documents of the Green Claims Directive. There's a proposal of the Commission, there is a position of the EU Parliament, and the general approach of the EU Council. So there is not one final text right now, but if you look into all of those 3 documents, you'll see that they are quite similar. And all of those documents say that claims have to be verified before communicating to consumers by a third-party accredited verifier body. And all of those verification details have to be then communicated to the end consumers. So if I'm going to buy a bottle of water in, let's say, summer 2027, when the Green Claims Directive will be applied upon, there will have to be, if there is a green claim, for example, it's like natural mineral water, which would be seen as a green claim, there has to be a QR code, or there has to be some kind of link or RFID chip, which then will give me a link to a website where I can see the Green Claims credentials. And also in the Green Claims Directive, it is said that the digital product passport, if there already is a passport implemented, should be used as the data carrier for those claim credentials. So these examples I want to show you that the digital product passport will be coming along the whole product life cycle. And there are some other examples here. For example, for composition data, what kind of substances of concern are in your product. The development will have to think about that. Purchasing will have to go through the whole line of the supply chain from tier N to tier 1, trying to get the primary data and trying to form consortiums so that they can achieve the traceability goals they have there. There are some circularity examples. For example, there will be introduced performance requirements on the recyclability, on the recycled content, reusability, durability. I can name a lot of those KPIs. All of those will be introduced by the ESPR through the digital product passports. And I already mentioned the green claims. So the green claims have to be then substantiated, and those substantiation information to be shared upon on a digital product passport. Also for recyclers, it is important when the waste product is coming to them that they will gather information on how to dismantle and recycle products, and these instructions also have to be shared over a DPP. And in the use phase, also for a consumer, there will be instructions on how to use the product to be mostly environmentally efficient, for example. So all of this, now you could ask, okay, so what does it have to do with me? Well, do I have to do a digital product passport for my products? Or is this just some niche legislation that maybe might be introduced but might not be? I can tell you it's going to be introduced and is already has been implemented actually for some products. So here you can see the ESPR is going to start. The ESPR just was adopted this year, like, I don't know, 2 months ago, is going to start introducing delegated regulations by the EU Commission with the first batch of products that are going to be regulated, are going to get a digital product passport for themselves. So we have here, for example, textiles, tires, iron, steel, a lot of those also for the automotive sector, very important, but also for other sectors. I looked a little bit about who is here in this room, and I can see that there are a lot of products here that also you're producing that might be of relevance to you. So these first batch of ESPR regulated products, these regulations will come in 2026 and will be adoptable 2027. So there are only 2.5 or 3 years until it will also affect you with an application. But there are going to be other batches. So this is only the first round. Every 3 years, there will be a new work plan with new products. And the goal of the EU Commission is to really regulate every regulated product in the EU market, with some exceptions, because there are some products which will be regulated through product-specific legislation. So here we have, for example, batteries. Batteries already have a battery passport. The regulation already is in place, and battery producers are on the hill on this topic and try to do it, since the go live for the battery passport is February 2027. So this will be the first digital product passport that has to be implemented by 2027. Construction products also have their own regulation, will introduce their own construction passports. And for vehicles in the automotive sector, very important, they have a different kind of regulations. The end-of-life vehicles regulation is focusing on the circularity aspect of vehicles. It will also introduce a so-called circularity vehicle passport, or CVP. And packaging, also the packaging regulation will be amended so that it will introduce their own passport. So altogether, I'm now at 15 minutes. I just wanted to give you some food for thought. When you talk about carbon neutrality and activities for carbon footprint, or also environmental footprint, material footprint on the one side, and you talk about circularity and recyclability, recycled content and these activities there, that those kind of performance requirements will be also regulated through the ESPR, and product-specific legislation will be part of a digital product passport of your product in the future. And I would just invite you to think about if it would be of any advantage to your company to implement a product passport before the regulators come and tell you to implement it, because it takes a lot of time. I would say at least 2 years to get everything done and in place. Right now, the standards are going to be coming, and it is a good time to start thinking about digital product passports. And so I would just conclude, if you are ready or not ready for digital product passports, let's sit together at the table and talk about it a little bit more in detail. Thank you.